In a stunning move, the premiers of British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba have banded together to bypass federal authority, sparking what many are now calling a constitutional crisis. This Western alliance has declared its intent to independently manage immigration, taxation, and natural resources, areas that have long been considered the federal government's domain. The announcement has sent shockwaves through Parliament Hill, leaving Prime Minister Mark Carney scrambling to contain the political fallout. How did relations between Ottawa and the West unravel so dramatically? Do these premiers have legal standing for their bold defiance? And are we witnessing the beginning of a seismic shift in how Canada is governed? Let's explore what led to this moment, the high-stakes legal and political battles ahead, and what it could mean for the future of Canadian federalism. Historical context of federal-provincial relations. The story of Canada's federal government and the Western provinces goes back a long way, and it hasn't always been smooth sailing. From the very beginning, there's been a push and pull between Ottawa and the provinces out west. When Manitoba joined Canada in 1870, it was tiny compared to what it is today. The federal government controlled most of the land and resources, which didn't sit well with the local people. Saskatchewan and Alberta came into the picture later, in 1905, but they faced the same problem. Ottawa kept control of their natural resources until 1930. British Columbia joined in 1871 with the promise of a railroad, but had to wait years for that promise to be kept. The Great Depression hit the western provinces especially hard in the 1930s. Farmers struggled with drought and low prices, while Ottawa seemed far away and out of touch with their problems. This created a feeling that the federal government didn't understand or care about western needs. After World War II, things got more complicated. Alberta discovered major oil reserves, and suddenly questions about who controlled these resources became really important. The National Energy Program in the early 1980s was a huge flashpoint. The federal government under Pierre Trudeau tried to keep oil prices low for Eastern Canadians while taking a bigger share of Alberta's oil profits. Albertans were furious, and many still remember this as a time when Ottawa took advantage of their province. In the 1980s and 90s, Western provinces pushed for more say in national decisions. The Meech Lake and Charlottetown Accords tried to address some provincial concerns, but both failed. This left many Westerners feeling like their voices didn't matter in Canada's big decisions. The Reform Party emerged from this frustration in the late 1980s with their slogan, "The West wants in." They believed Western provinces needed stronger representation in Ottawa. Eventually, this movement helped shape today's Conservative Party. There have been good times too. The 2010 Winter Olympics in Vancouver showed how federal and provincial governments could work together on big projects. During natural disasters like floods and wildfires, different levels of government have cooperated to help people in need. More recently, disputes over pipelines have created new tensions. Projects like the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion have pitted provincial interests against each other, with the federal government caught in the middle. Climate policies have also been controversial, with some Western provinces arguing that Ottawa's carbon pricing hurts their economies unfairly. The COVID-19 pandemic showed both cooperation and conflict. At first, governments worked together on health measures and financial support, but as the pandemic continued, provinces and Ottawa disagreed about restrictions, vaccine distribution, and who should pay for what. Throughout this history, Western provinces have often felt that decisions made in Ottawa don't reflect their unique needs and interests. The feeling that the East gets special treatment while Western concerns are ignored has deep roots. This Western alienation has shaped Canadian politics for generations and continues to influence how provincial leaders interact with the federal government today. At the forefront of this growing discontent are the premiers themselves, leaders who aren't just voicing grievances, but taking bold steps to change the game. Key Western premiers and their grievances. The Western provinces of Canada have been led by some pretty outspoken premiers in recent years, and they've had plenty to say about how Ottawa treats them. Danielle Smith became Alberta's premier in 2022, and she's been one of the loudest voices against the federal government. She believes Ottawa doesn't respect Alberta's right to control its own oil and gas industry. The federal government keeps moving the goalposts on environmental regulations, she often says. Smith points to the federal carbon tax as a direct attack on Alberta's economy, arguing it unfairly targets provinces that rely on natural resources. In neighboring Saskatchewan, Premier Scott Moe has similar complaints. He's been in office since 2018 and frequently talks about how federal policies hurt Saskatchewan farmers and energy workers. Moe has repeatedly said, "Ottawa collects billions in equalization payments from our province, but doesn't give us a fair say in national decisions. He's especially upset about federal emissions targets that he claims ignore the reality of Saskatchewan's economy. British Columbia's situation is a bit different. Premier David Eby took office in 2022, and while less confrontational than his prairie counterparts, has his own list of grievances. He's frustrated with what he sees as inadequate federal funding for housing and healthcare in his province. The cost of living in Vancouver and Victoria is through the roof, but federal support hasn't kept pace, Eby has stated at provincial meetings. Manitoba's Premier Wab Kinew, who took office in 2023, has focused on getting fair treatment for his province's unique needs. As the first First Nations premier of a Canadian province, Kinew has pushed Ottawa to provide better support for Indigenous communities, while also fighting for Manitoba's economic interests. These Western premiers share some common complaints. First, they all believe the federal government makes too many decisions without properly consulting them. Second, they argue that Ottawa doesn't understand the different economic realities of Western provinces. Third, they feel the equalization payment system, where money from have provinces goes to have-not provinces, unfairly benefits Eastern Canada. Natural resources are a particularly hot topic. The Western provinces control vast reserves of oil, gas, minerals, and timber. When the federal government creates new environmental regulations or blocks pipeline projects, Western premiers see this as stepping on their constitutional rights to manage their own resources. Healthcare funding is another major issue. All four Western premiers have complained that Ottawa's health transfers don't match the growing costs of running hospitals and clinics. They point out that their populations are growing faster than those in other parts of Canada, but the funding formulas don't account for this. Immigration policy has also caused tension. The Western premiers want more control over who comes to their provinces, arguing they understand their labor needs better than federal officials in Ottawa. These grievances aren't just talk. The Western premiers have started taking concrete actions to work around federal authority, creating a united front that has seriously challenged Ottawa's power in ways not seen for decades. It all began with a meeting that sent a clear message. Recent developments and actions. The Western premiers have been busy lately, taking bold steps that have left Ottawa scrambling to respond. Last month, the premiers of Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and British Columbia held a surprise meeting in Calgary without inviting any federal representatives. They called it the Western Solutions Summit, and it was the first time in decades that these provinces met formally without Ottawa at the table. At this summit, Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith announced what she called the Alberta Sovereignty Act Implementation Plan, which allows her province to simply ignore certain federal laws they believe hurt Alberta's interests. She stood at the podium and declared, "We will no longer ask for permission to develop our resources or manage our economy." Saskatchewan's Premier Scott Moe followed with his own bombshell, revealing that his province had already started redirecting federal tax dollars collected within Saskatchewan borders. Instead of sending this money to Ottawa first, they created a Saskatchewan First Fund that holds the money until they decide which federal programs are worth supporting. The premiers also signed the Western Accord, a formal agreement to coordinate their responses to federal policies. This document specifically targets Ottawa's climate policies, calling the carbon tax an unconstitutional overreach and promising to fight it together in court and through provincial legislation. British Columbia's premier, typically more aligned with federal policies, surprised many by joining this rebellion. At a press conference in Vancouver, he explained, "While we support climate action, we cannot support policies that unfairly burden Western economies without proper consultation." Manitoba's premier took things even further by announcing a provincial referendum on federal equalization payments, asking citizens if they want to continue the current system where Manitoba's resources generate wealth that gets distributed to other provinces. The tension reached new heights when the four premiers appeared together on national television, refusing to attend the next First Minister's meeting unless their demands for policy changes were addressed first. This boycott threat sent shockwaves through political circles in Ottawa. Perhaps most concerning for federal authorities was the creation of the Western Interprovincial Trade Commission, a new body that allows these provinces to make trade deals with each other and with international partners without federal oversight. They've already signed preliminary agreements with several U.S. states for energy exports. Social media campaigns with hashtags like West Stands Up and Ottawa Overreach have gained millions of followers, with premiers actively participating in these online movements to rally public support. The Western provinces have also also begun coordinating their legal challenges to federal authority. Instead of each province filing separate lawsuits against federal policies they oppose, they now share legal resources and file joint challenges, making their cases stronger and more difficult for federal lawyers to counter. Most recently, the premiers announced plans to hold regular Western citizens' assemblies, where ordinary people from their provinces can voice concerns about federal policies directly to provincial leaders, bypassing federal representatives entirely. These actions represent the most serious challenge to federal authority in decades, with Ottawa now facing a coordinated resistance rather than isolated complaints from individual provinces. Ottawa's response to the Western Challenge. When the Western premiers decided to take matters into their own hands, Ottawa wasn't happy. The federal government, which normally has the final say on many national issues, suddenly found itself playing catch-up. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau called an emergency meeting with his cabinet. They spent hours trying to figure out how to respond to what they saw as a direct challenge to their authority. The next day, Trudeau appeared on national television looking serious. "While we respect provincial rights, we must work together as one country," he said. "Going around established processes threatens the unity that makes Canada strong." Behind the scenes, things were more heated. Sources inside the government revealed that federal ministers were shocked by how boldly the Western provinces had acted. One anonymous official called it a constitutional crisis in the making. The federal government's first official response was to send formal letters to each Western premier requesting immediate talks. Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith received her letter, but told reporters she wouldn't be summoned to Ottawa like a schoolchild being called to the principal's office. Ottawa then tried a different approach. The Federal Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs reached out personally to each Western province, offering to visit them instead. This small gesture seemed to cool tensions slightly. The federal government also announced a new Western economic partnership with $3.2 billion in funding for resource development projects. Critics quickly called this an obvious attempt to buy back Western loyalty. "You can't ignore us for years and then throw money at the problem," Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe said at a press conference. "This isn't about funding, it's about respect and having a real say in decisions that affect our provinces." Ottawa's response also included legal threats. The Justice Department prepared court challenges, arguing that the Western provinces had overstepped their constitutional authority. However, they held back on filing these challenges, worried that legal battles would only make things worse. Instead, the Prime Minister appointed a special envoy, a respected former judge from Manitoba, to meet with Western leaders and find common ground. These meetings happened behind closed doors, away from media attention. Meanwhile, federal departments were ordered to speed up approvals for Western projects that had been stuck in regulatory limbo. Energy projects that had waited years for decisions suddenly received green lights within weeks. Parliament became a battleground too. Opposition parties blamed the government for letting relations with the Western provinces deteriorate. During question period, the Prime Minister defended his government's actions while promising a new era of cooperation. Public opinion polls showed Canadians were divided. Many in Ontario and Quebec felt the Western premiers had gone too far, while Western Canadians largely supported their leaders' bold moves. After 6 weeks of back and forth, Ottawa proposed a provincial autonomy framework that would give provinces more control over certain areas while maintaining federal oversight of national concerns. This framework included regular meetings between the Prime Minister and premiers, faster decision-making on resource projects, and clearer rules about when Ottawa could step in on provincial matters. The Western premiers didn't immediately reject the proposal, which Ottawa took as a positive sign. "We're willing to listen," British Columbia's premier said, "but the details matter." For now, both sides have stepped back from their most confrontational positions. Ottawa has learned a hard lesson about ignoring Western concerns, while the Western premiers have shown they're willing to push constitutional boundaries when they feel ignored. Implications for Canada's future. The standoff between Western provinces and the federal government isn't just a temporary political fight. It could change Canada for years to come. When provinces start going around Ottawa's authority, it creates cracks in how the country works together. These cracks might get bigger over time. History shows that when regions feel ignored, they start thinking more about their own interests and less about the whole country. The most serious worry is that this conflict could fuel separatist feelings. Alberta has already seen movements like Wexit gain followers in recent years. When Premier Smith refuses to be summoned to Ottawa like a schoolchild, she's using language that connects with people who feel disrespected by the central government. Saskatchewan and Alberta, with their resource-based economies, have long felt that Ottawa doesn't understand their needs. This latest conflict gives more ammunition to those who question whether being part of Canada benefits Western provinces at all. British Columbia, though less vocal about separation, could find itself caught between loyalty to Canada and practical alliances with its neighboring provinces. If the Western Bloc continues to act as a unit, BC might be pulled further from federal influence. Beyond the extreme possibility of provinces trying to leave Canada, there's the more immediate problem of a country that can't work together effectively. When provinces and the federal government are fighting, important national projects get delayed or cancelled. Climate policies, energy development, and transportation networks all require cooperation to succeed. The provincial autonomy framework proposed by Ottawa might solve some immediate problems, but it could also create a patchwork of rules across the country. Businesses might struggle with different regulations in each province. Citizens could receive different levels of service depending on where they live. Indigenous communities are watching this conflict closely too. Many First Nations have treaties with the Crown, not provincial governments. If provinces gain more power, what happens to those agreements? Some Indigenous leaders worry their rights could be caught in the middle of this power struggle. Canada's international standing is another concern. When the country appears divided, it weakens its voice on the world stage. Trade partners might question whether agreements made with Ottawa will be respected by provincial governments. The $3.2 billion Western Economic Partnership shows how expensive these conflicts can become. If provinces learn that challenging federal authority leads to special funding, it could encourage more confrontations in the future. There's also the risk that this regional approach to governance spreads. Atlantic provinces might form their own bloc. Quebec, which has its own history of separatist movements, could be inspired to push harder for special status. The appointment of a special envoy from Manitoba shows Ottawa recognizes the seriousness of the situation, but temporary peacemaking might not address the deeper issues of regional alienation that have been building for decades. For average Canadians, especially students and young people who will inherit this country, the conflict raises important questions about what kind of Canada they want to live in. Should power be more centralized in Ottawa or distributed to provinces? How can regional differences be respected while maintaining a united country? The next federal election will likely become a referendum on these questions. Voters in Western provinces will judge whether Ottawa's responses were sincere or just crisis management. Meanwhile, voters in Central Canada might worry about giving too much power to provinces. Canada has faced regional tensions before and survived, but this challenge to federal authority represents one of the most serious tests of Canadian unity in recent memory.